Hi, everyone. Thanks for downloading this episode of the Woke Mommy Chatter podcast. So in the last episode, I chatted with Brianne DeRosa, author of the blog Red, Round, or Green, about work-life balance and the challenges of being a parent when your work just isn't flexible.
How can we acknowledge the fact that if you've hired somebody for a full-time role, that they may be able to do some of that flexibly, not between the hours of 9 and 5, maybe?
What does work-life balance look like in a ideal world?
I think it looks different for everybody. When you've truly achieved it, you have the sense that you are able to give your full attention to the things that are important. And that can be, that can change from minute to minute, day to day, but it's having the feeling that you are not constantly being asked to turn your back on things that are of essential priority to you.
This week, I continue my conversation with Brianne, and we started that conversation by comparing what maternity leave looks like in the US versus Canada, where I am.
Here we're lucky because we get a year off for maternity leave, and now there's an additional year if you wish to take that, even though it's unpaid. But so there's potentially 2 years there. So that's great. But what hasn't caught up is the rest. So after your child is like 3 and 4 and 5, when it actually begins to get more difficult because they have after school activities and they still require parents to be there and to be involved. And the school expectations are also, out of whack with real life because, they're asking for volunteers and they will let you know at the drop of a hat that there's a dance-a-thon and they would like parents to attend. And it's like, well, I have a job. I can't do that. I can't be there. So these things are not aligned. And it just feels like we have this, we're living here in Canada anyway, in this kind of like push-pull culture where there is a kind of like a push for a little bit of flexibility, and there is recognition around, parents needing to be present for their kids, but then there's like a pull away from that at the same time, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that, not all the sectors of society are lined up. And, I would actually say this is one of the things that I say to people often that completely freaks them out. But it's a truth that I wish someone had given me a little earlier, which is we think that our children need us the most when they're infants and toddlers and preschoolers. And I'm definitely not discounting how important parental involvement is when they're infants and toddlers and preschoolers, right? I mean, absolutely, it would be silly for me to say that that's not important. But in fact, as you've expressed, as they get older, they need you more. And it's not only because of the extracurriculars and because the school is going to be like, hey, by the way, there's a diorama due tomorrow and I need 24 peanut-free cupcakes for the class party, or a chaperone for the museum trip on Friday. Hey, can you do it? But it's about the fact that when your kids start to get older, they are starting to spend more time and more energy on soliciting opinions, feedback, and influence from people who are not you. That's healthy. It's important. It's part of individuation and growing up. But it also means that as parents, we really need that time to check in with our kids. We need to know what's going on with them. We need to have enough time to spend with them that we can still be a dominant influence in their lives, even when they're, tweens and teens and they really don't want us to be. We have to be able to be there to check in, to make sure that we know who they're hanging out with, what classes are they taking, what homework is due, how are things going, because their mental health and their well-being depends on still having that relationship with us. And if parents are expected to be at work, until all hours, and then the kids are at their extracurriculars and all of their things, and suddenly the family doesn't get together until 8:00 at night, and then what? Oh, now I've got to get my homework done, and, dad's got this thing, and okay, well, now everybody goes to bed. Where is that time? Where does it come from? And that we don't credit that enough, that older kids need us maybe even more than our little ones do.
100%, 100%. And I think this is actually a good segue to talk about privilege, because sometimes I think about, my blog it's focused on Black issues, and I'm a Black mom, and that's kind of where my perspective comes from. And sometimes I think about, the last couple of years where we've had all these shootings and just different, everything going on. And sometimes I think about Black children and some of the barriers and issues that they face as they grow up. And one of the things I see in my community here, it's exactly what you just described. It's that idea of when, as the kids get older, the parents are not there. And it's not that they're not bad. It's not that they're bad parents, but it's kind of like this loosening of the reins a little bit, because people feel like the kids are older and the parents are off working and they're not able to be fully there for their kids. And that's kind of where kids kind of get into trouble a little bit. And I do feel like there needs to be a bit of a realignment around that, so that as your kids are older, there is an understanding. And it's not just workplaces. I think parents need to understand this too. But there needs to be that understanding that you need to be there. You need to be there. And there needs to be accommodation for that somehow.
I think you're spot on. And, the idea that just because a kid is old enough to be home alone doesn't mean that they should be home alone all that often, without you. And I think you're right. Society itself has a really hard, alignment in that way. And you're also right that this is a conversation that's about privilege. I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation if I weren't coming from a place of privilege, right? I mean, ultimately, the whole idea of leaning in or leaning out presents it as a choice, which means you have to be a person who has a choice, right? And the complexity of the issue is most people don't have as much choice in these matters as they'd like. And disproportionately speaking, women of color in particular are going to have a lot less opportunity and choice in a lot of communities across America, certainly. And I'm guessing also Canada and other parts of the world. The choices are not always theirs to make. And so how are we setting them up and setting their children up to succeed or fail in a society that demands that you lean in or lean out or, just pick something, but be good at it?
Yeah, that's such a powerful question. I was talking to some homeschoolers, and they're Black moms. And we were talking about the number of homeschooling Black parents has kind of increased over the last couple of years. But someone raised the point that, a lot of parents Black parents would love to homeschool their kids, but they don't have that choice because they don't have, or we as Black people don't have the same level of financial privilege that other cultures have been able to kind of build, that generational wealth that they've been able to build through the centuries or the years, that hasn't been afforded to Black people because of the history that we have. And that's part of it. Like, you don't have that. You don't have like a cushion almost to kind of lean back on in case, it doesn't go right, so that you can quit your job and stay home. There's no cushion there for some people, and that's really difficult. And then the other comment I often get, my blog, I mean, I'm married, so I talk about, I'm also, even as a Black person, there's a level of privilege there in the fact that, my husband and I were financially stable. We both have good jobs. And we're like a nuclear family, and there's a level of privilege that comes with that, whether or not I'm a person of color. And I'll get comments from single moms that will say, well, you don't speak for me, and you look at things from from one point of view, I'm a single mom, I'm tired too. I do this all on my own all the time. And I think that's a fair criticism, and it's a fair point. And I guess what I'm asking you is, when we look at the lead-in philosophy, even the lean-out philosophy, if you are a single parent, where do you fit?
Yeah, I mean, such a valuable question, right? And this is the whole thing. There is no place for you to lean if you are a single parent. I mean, I know a very select few single parents who have managed to figure out how to chart their own course and do so really successfully for themselves and their kids. And I hugely admire what they've been able to do, but it's just not a realistic paradigm for most people. And that's part of the whole conundrum across the board is this lack of ability to see things from another person's perspective and to really consider how we are really crippling certain segments of society by not putting ourselves in their shoes. And that's been really interesting to me with Sheryl Sandberg, because, the lean in thing was so hot and she was so kind of convinced that, well, this works. Of course this works. And then when she was literally forced to see it from a different perspective through this terrible tragedy that she's experienced, all of a sudden she had this revelation that, oh my God, she's left out huge, huge swaths of women across the population just by not even considering that somebody's experience wouldn't be the same as her own. And I mean, she's owning it, and that's great, or she's trying to, but that's the definition of privilege, right? And if you're a single mom, I can only imagine how hard, I rolled my eyes at lean in. I can only imagine how I would have felt, if I didn't have a partner at home. Yeah. My gosh, what are you supposed to do? You can't not lean into your work if you're the sole breadwinner, but you also can't be plugged in 24/7 to work if you're supposed to be raising your kids at the same time. And society's going to judge you on both sides of that coin.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I find really interesting about lean in is that for a lot of Black women, it wasn't about leaning in, because we've been leaning in for years. We've had no choice. We've been working, we've been holding down the fort. We have been working forever. And I think we're finally at a stage in our history where for a lot of Black women, the privilege is leading out and being able to say, you know what? I am not going to work. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom, or I'm going to do things on my own. What I find with a lot of Black women is there is this kind of like wave of self-determination through entrepreneurship and building companies or building businesses that might start off small, might start off at home, but then grow into something more. And I see that quite often. And it's very exciting, but it's the opposite of lean in. It's about kind of taking that step back. So that's also a piece I found really interesting with that lean in philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? And that's really what I was writing about in the piece that brought us together, is this idea that, in the way that things are right now, you almost can't do work and family both the way that everybody thinks that you should. And so there's kind of this thing where the new wave, like you say, is how do I set my own terms, right? Whether I choose to work full-time in an office, not work full-time in an office, send my kids to school, homeschool, whatever the permutation is that works for me, how do I set my own terms in a way that does not allow someone else to define my power or define my value? right? Women in general, and I am a white woman. I acknowledge freely all the privilege that comes with my life. So I can only imagine for anyone who is not me walking around in my skin, the different levels of privilege and lack of privilege that come into this. But we as women collectively at different levels have allowed people to define our worth for us for a very long time. And this whole new way of thinking about work and thinking about parenting and thinking about our lives is about taking that back and saying, no, I know what I'm worth. And I'm going to make you see what I'm worth. And I'm not going to compromise on those terms.
That's so powerful. That's so true. That's an amazing way to kind of wrap this discussion in a bow. That's great. I think one of the things I loved about the article is that it really kind of just summarized I felt like you were pulling things out of me in terms of how I was feeling about this whole work-life balance. I mean, it's really hard, it's really difficult. And sometimes I think I don't think I can go on like this for much longer, but I don't know. We'll see.
Oh my gosh. And I so feel where you're at, because it really, as positive as I think things are right now in terms of our ability to turn the tide, there still are not great options, and I'm sure you, like many of us, you spend every day trying to decide how much of myself am I able to give to each one of these tasks, and how much do we need my salary and how much, can we,
Exactly.
have we saved up enough money to just move to Mars and get off the rat race?
Yeah. I think that's the scariest thing, right? It's that needing the salary and needing the 2-person salary is just, that's what chains you. It chains you to, you're those roles that are kind of comfortable and demanding. So.
How should we be defining work-life balance?
It has nothing to do with how much time you spend doing one thing or another, but it has everything to do with feeling the freedom to attend to what you personally need to attend to at any given point in time, whether that's a really big project for work, or whether that's going to the school play or chaperoning the trip to the museum, or traveling, or, pursuing a hobby. What is it that's going to fulfill you, light you up, and make you a competent, productive, satisfied version of yourself? That's what it really is about.
If you enjoy listening to the show, be sure to subscribe so you get automatic updates of new episodes every Tuesday. Don't forget to follow Woke Mommy Chatter on Twitter at @WokeMommy, on Instagram, and follow along on Facebook at Woke Mommy Chatter. If you'd like to get in touch, have feedback, ideas for the show, drop me a line at wokemommychatter@gmail.com.